Welcome back to the John Fredericks Show. You're on with Colonel Mike and Dr. Michael Scheuer. And on the line with us is one of our great guests, Renn from Urban File, Forbes, and Manhattan Institute. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back again. It's great to be on.
Hey, we always love having you on. I wanted to invite you on a little earlier, but it's okay. We can use this one. The article before last is Post-Work Won't Work. And its subtitle is The Universal Basic Income is an Idea Based on a Dubious Social and Moral Logic. And this was written on August 4th in the CJ webpage. Dr. Scheuer,
right.
Say hello.
Morning, sir. Nice to have you again. I look forward to hearing you every time I'm down here.
Oh, excellent. Thanks.
So, Aaron, tell us a little bit about this article.
Well, for those who aren't familiar, the universal basic income is an idea that's getting a lot of mind share, particularly in Silicon Valley. It's that we're going to put everybody out of jobs with robots, and then what are they going to do? And so in order to keep people from rioting, maybe we just need to give them a check every month. And so the universal basic income is basically a proposal to give every single person a guaranteed minimum amount of money, cash, no strings attached, unconditional. You don't have to work for your entire life.
Almost sounds like welfare.
Yes, well, it's intended to replace much, but not all, of the current welfare programs. And in that respect, it's actually not a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. Welfare produces a lot of very bad incentives. So someone who's poor and who's collecting food stamps, for example, and their income goes up, they said, hey, I want to improve my life, I'm going to go get a better job. Well, now your income goes up, you lose your benefits. And so it's what's called a poverty trap. There's a long range of income into which basically every dollar you make, you lose almost the entire dollar in forfeited benefits. So some people who are not that well off are paying effectively 100% marginal tax rate. So the idea is to eliminate these disincentives that effectively trap people in poverty. And by making it unconditional on work, then people are able to go out and make more money, and it's a benefit to them. It encourages people to work. Milton Friedman, in fact, supported a similar idea called the negative income tax for that very reason.
Uh-huh. Mike?
However, it's got some downsides as well. The main issue is, we've seen some examples of this in real life through, just for example, the American Indian tribes, some of whom own casinos, and are distributing cash grants to people in their tribes. Some reports have suggested that just really hasn't worked out well, and it's actually made social conditions worse. Whereas tribes who invested their money into tribal-owned businesses that people worked at actually did much better. So that this idea that we'll simply pay people and they will become self-actualized creators and this stuff it just hasn't proven to be true. We're seeing all these reports about what they call the NEETs, neither in education, employment, or training. Basically, people who are adult male men, mostly young, who aren't really going to school or working, and they're sitting in mom's basement playing video games. Well, under this universal basic income, that's a perfectly okay thing to do. If you kind of scale yourself down to a minimal life, you can literally sit around all day and do nothing. And we see people who are in fact doing that. So this is not a real solution for society.
Where would the money come from, Aaron?
Very high taxation. There's no doubt about that. They're looking at, I think they're looking at as much as a quarter or more of GDP dedicated to effectively this form of redistribution. And again, some of it is, if you look at the logic coming out of Silicon Valley, it's basically, our ability to innovate and disrupt cannot be changed. So we will just have to agree to, like the Duke of the domain in the Middle Ages distributing, poverty relief, during the famine. We will, preside over the commanding heights of the economy, live in splendor, but we will, give some of our billions to redistribute to the masses.
Well, I hope that some of them remember that a lot of dukes got hung
Yeah, right. Right. Well, that's the thing. I think it's kind of to me, it's a complete radical, and to the book I reviewed about it, the subtitle really admits it's a radical idea. They call it that, a radical idea. This idea that we're going to completely restructure how human societies function away from ones where we all contribute to society through our work and feel productive in what we're doing, feel that we're making a contribution, and we get paid for that, and we engage in a marketplace exchange into a completely different basis. And it's amazing to me that just how many people today are willing to do literally any and all forms of disruption are good. And there's it's sort of a Pollyannish view that there's no downsides to any of this. And the thing is, once you do it, you can't go back.
Right. It's like
the
any
other thing
program.
that gets me is like many of these left-wing reform movements. I hesitate to even call them reform movements. They're left-wing radicalist movements. What they do is they basically claim, well, this is a more moral way of doing it. And whenever the people start using language around justice or morality,
yes.
You should be very, very cautious, because what they're basically saying is, I am right and you are not just, this isn't just a policy we disagree with, like a tax rate. This is literally about the stuff of right and wrong. Therefore, if you disagree with me, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And they don't claim that up front, but as soon as they get power, that's what they do. I mean, we've seen it time and time and time again. And you can be sure that as this idea gets traction, eventually people who oppose it will be demonized as evil retrograde.
Well, they're kind of halfway there now, aren't they, though, in the United States? Well, I think I've read that a little more or a little less than 50% of the population doesn't pay any income tax.
Well, the income taxes are only one form of taxation. Let's be fair.
Sure.
Payroll tax, that does not include, FICA tax, Social Security, Medicare. It doesn't include sales tax. Property taxes, often indirectly paid. I don't put as much stock in some of those surveys, but it is true that our income tax system and our taxation system is highly progressive, and that in the United States, higher income earners are paying a lot bigger share than they are even in some European countries. Mm-hmm. In Europe, they've made a social contract with their population. They say, look, everybody, not just the rich, everybody is going to pay half their income or so in taxes. We're going to have very high tax rates for everybody, and in return, you're going to get very good public services across the board. Well, in the United States, it doesn't work like that. We have a system where people think we're going to get free stuff with other people's money. If we want to have a conversation where we want to build, some nicer parks and we want to raise taxes for that, that's a conversation we can have. And as a society, if people say they want to do that, what bugs me is this idea that there's a free lunch.
Yeah.
And if somebody else, we'll just tax the rich, which basically means somebody else, to give me free stuff. I really think that's kind of like negative logic.
It's absurd, and the whole European thing is absurd. What do the Europeans get for their money? They got Barcelona yesterday, they got Nice, right. They get London, they get Paris, they get Berlin.
There's no protection,
and they get people who will never assimilate into their continent, and so in the long run, they probably get some kind of a civil war.
Well, they do get some things that work, like their transit systems actually work for the most part. Unlike the Washington Metro and the, New York subway. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, the public services in Europe, some of them actually function better than in the United States.
I would suspect that's correct.
We pay more to build subways in the United States than they do in Europe, and our subways run far worse.
Yeah.
So there are some things where, that's the other problem with the U.S. We might pay more, but that doesn't mean we're going to get anything better, because we have sort of a tradition of poorly delivered public services in this country.
Plus, Aaron, we have a population of young men today, like you said, living in their basements. This is not, the 16 to 21-year-old crowd anymore. Mm-hmm. They're into the 30s. I mean, this is like a big number by 30. In the old days, and I say 20 years ago being the old days, people were married.
Yeah.
30 years old playing with the iPad and the Xbox in the basement, that's some dangerous ground now.
Right. I think, the challenge is that, when you're in your 20s, kind of partying all the time and not really working very hard, is a kind of enjoyable way to live. You haven't built any expectation that your life's going to be great. When I was in college, I was able to live a pretty fun life, really, really dirt cheap. So you don't need a lot of money to be a single guy. Video games don't cost that much. Phones don't cost that much. The problem gets in is, when you start getting older, that doesn't really compute when you're in your 40s anymore, in your 50s. And if you haven't been building towards a life, you suddenly find yourself in a very, very bleak situation. So historically, we sent signals to young men and young women that they should, make steps towards adulthood, towards preparing to be, husbands, wives, fathers, and mothers, channeled them into good behavior, because when you're young, you don't really see the future in the same way that you do when you're older. Like today, I just had my first child. I'm 47 years old. I'm one of those kind of guys. And, when I was 30, I said I never wanted kids. But the problem is I could not comprehend how I would feel differently in the future. Only once I got to be about 35 years old did I, and I've noticed this in other people, that I really acquire the ability to think about the story arc of my life and where it's going and what's going to happen when I'm older. Until you reach a certain age, you just can't even relate to it emotionally, and people make decisions with lifelong consequences without really understanding the ramifications of them. And then again, in the past, when there were these structures of society, family, social pressures, churches, employers, that kind of were looking for a certain thing and certain behaviors, it was more conformist in a certain sense, but fewer people blew their lives up.
That universal income sounds to me like a zombie creator. You should have all kinds.
It sort of basically is. It's often sold. You can see the appeal to like a 20-something millennial who wants to work for a nonprofit or be like a full-time activist. In a sense, a lot of the aspiring journalists who write about this, they're not making very much money, right? They're freelancing for different blogs here and there. The idea that, I can get this universal basic income and now I can just be a full-time activist blogger or something, that it's easy to see the appeal to a certain group of people, especially kind of young, educated urbanites. And it could be, a more productive activity too. I want to start a business. I have less risk and I can take more chances and do more interesting things. Maybe try to do more social good instead of having to focus on pure profits right away. Or I can afford to invest more in my business to grow it faster if I don't have to worry about, all these salaries. So there are some things there. The problem is that's just not the average person.
No, it's not.
And so, it's sort of like everything in our society. It's kind of an idea kind of geared towards the intellectual, cognitive, and financial elite in people who kind of have that kind of, Williamsburg mindset.
Yeah.
Aaron, are you on vacation now, or are you in New York City?
No, I'm in New York. I'm in my office right now, actually.
Oh, great.
So.
Okay, great. I thought we were pulling you away from vacation time.
Yeah, well, a lot of people here, it is interesting. I travel around and I study cities, and every city is different. And definitely New York is a place that a lot of people vacate in the summers because it gets very, very, very hot here.
Have you been to Williamsburg?
Subways.
Have you been to Williamsburg lately? Any restaurants?
The Williamsburg in Brooklyn, yes, I have been there.
Great restaurants.
I go there occasionally. In New York is like people, it's a cosmopolitan city, but it's also a parochial city, in that people tend to hang out in their neighborhoods. So I live in uptown Manhattan, so I don't go to Brooklyn very often.
Right.
But I do make it there on occasion.
Yeah, Williamsburg's a nice place to visit time to time. Mike, you've been to Williamsburg?
I have not.
Got to get up there.
Yeah.
Nice, really nice.
I've been New York probably a dozen times, and I've yet to figure out how to get a cab.
Really?
Yeah, I don't
just go, Maxie. Maxie.
I've tried everything. I've shown some leg.
When we were kids, Aaron. When we were kids, for fun, we'd yell out Maxie, and the guy would just jam on the brakes, with a checkered cab, And then we said, no, we're calling our friend Maxie. You know, just keep going.
There you go. There you go. Well, today it's like more and more people are taking Uber and Lyft and the rideshare platforms. You know, the taxi business has been taking a beating. They all put all their political chips on restricting the supply of taxi, controlling the market with these medallions you have to have.
You had the medallion, and then you had the mini medallion. Remember, there was a mini
and all
medallion.
that stuff. And people were borrowing huge money, and these medallions were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the value of them has been plummeting because now Uber and Lyft and these companies, a lot fewer people are taking taxis than used to.
I've been traveling the country the last couple of months, and everywhere you go, it's Uber. I'm like the odd man out. You don't have the Uber app? Let me call you an Uber car, you know?
It really is a couple times a year we have the people who work for my wife, once at Christmas and once at during the summer usually. They come to the house and we have a dinner or a cookout or something. But it's been amazing to watch how dependable and quick those Uber cars are.
Yes.
They're really great in cities. I used to live in Indianapolis. Uber is great in Indianapolis because it didn't have very good public transit, and the taxi service is basically non-existent. So if you wanted to go out with your wife for dinner and split a bottle of wine, Uber is much better. You never have to even worry about how much you're drinking or anything like that. I see it as great at potentially reducing drunk driving type of things in these communities that haven't historically had access to it, where you basically were forced to drive everywhere.
Yes.
And so I think there's a lot of positives from these things in terms of public safety and just convenience as well.
Yep, and jobs.
Aaron, we're coming down to the last 2 minutes. Michael Scheuer?
It's interesting that you say how New York empties out, because I was thinking yesterday here in Washington, we were down in Chesapeake and Norfolk here this morning, but I had to go out and run errands yesterday. I had about 6 things to do, and usually it would take 3 hours, and there was so little traffic yesterday that I was home in 90 minutes. It's amazing how it empties out in the summertime. I guess a lot of people have money for vacation.
Right. Wasn't Congress in recess in August?
Well, they're in recess in August, but they're normally in recess every other day. I mean, I always joke now, and my new joke is they have a full-time salary for a part-time job. Well,
even when they're in session, they're not doing anything.
No, they're not doing anything. But then again, they're only there from like Monday night or Tuesday, and they blow town by Thursday. And then they go back to the districts or wherever they're going traveling, and they constantly travel around the globe. But, I mean, they're really part-time workers who do really nothing but get a full-time salary. It's like being a weatherman and just saying, well, got a 50% chance of rain today. You get it right 50% of the time, right?
Right, exactly.
So that's what it is. Eric, Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's always good to have you. Yeah, it's great, and we'll keep reading your stuff.
Cool in that 93-degree weather down there.
Oh, it's terrible. Thanks so much, Aaron. Great.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.